Um, and who has more than 5 kids here? Well, 5 kids here. But see, so here's my family story. So my mom and dad were both in the Second World War. Dad did 100 combat missions between the Second World War and Korea. He grew up in a family of 4. His dad was of a family of 2, but one of the reasons was his dad died working on the railroad, and I'd always heard it was from smallpox, but I don't know if that's true or not. But they quarantined him on the railroad, and when he returned home, he was in a box. And so he grew up as a little boy with his brother John. That's my older brother Tom, and I'm John. We're named after them. And they pretty much grew up on the streets in Cleveland. My mom's side of the family, Mom grew up on a farm in South Dakota, 7 kids in her family. 6 of the 7 were girls, which, is maybe not the ideal workforce, but if you talk to those women, all my aunts, how much they did work on the farm, especially just working alongside with their dad, who they loved their dad and their mom very, very much. When my dad, who was a convert to the Catholic faith, married my mom, they went up to visit her parents after they were married, and Dad got up in the middle of the night because the bathroom was still, you had to go out the back of the house to the outhouse. Because this is out, I've been to the house his mom lived in. And boy, let me tell you, that was for us kids, that was a sobering thing. But Dad tripped in the hall, and as he fell, he was in the Air Force, he used one of those words that are, common amongst people who serve in the military. And when he looked up, he had tripped over my grandpa, who was on his knees in this darkened hall, praying in front of a rosary in front of the Virgin Mary. And so I would say my dad's family, his dad was Catholic but not practicing. His mom was Congregationalist, not practicing. But for the Peter family, very devout people. When they moved into Mitchell, they went to Mass. And so in Grandpa's family, which emigrated from Switzerland, there were like 8 kids. When Mom and Dad died, around the turn of the century, the older ones raised all the younger ones, and they didn't go off and get married until all the younger ones had kind of been placed to what they were going to do in life. And my grandma's side, on my mom's side, maternal grandmother, similar thing. They immigrated from Luxembourg and brought their family to South Dakota, which was very different than Luxembourg had been. But that tends to follow fertility rates through the 19th century. They began to halve in the 19th century. They even fell after the First World War. I think I look around and I think probably most of us in the room are baby boomers. Yeah. Well, baby boomers are part of the increased birth rate after the Second World War. And so our family of 8 that I grew up in. The story of Hannah and her children is, I think we all took it for granted, my growing up, that larger families were the norm. But it is not so anymore. And so Hannah and her children, we're going to have Dr. Charles Baird, who I'd asked to come and sit at our table. He's a professor of economics at the University of California, East Bay. California State University, East Bay. So would you come up and take the place in the glaring spotlight? Okay. And what Dr. Baird is going to do, he's going to go through the story of Hannah's children, but talk about the economic implications of smaller families or no children in a family, and what that means, and how it's not just our country, it's China, it's Japan, it's some of the major countries in the world are just failing in their birth rate. We worry now about how you pay for Social Security. When it started under Francis Sullivan and FDR, there were 33 workers for everybody on Social Security. Now I think there's 3 workers for everybody that's on Social Security. And so it's really changed a lot. Our next panelists, distinguished panelists who have accomplished a great deal in life, mother and father of 5, Ben and Kristen Tonner, please come up to the table. And Ben read the book, and I think you both come from smaller families, But if you recognize, like that kid back there, she's one of the core members of our altar server corps, and 5 kids at Mass. One of the little ones back there, Lucy, who's all the way in the back, they were telling me the story of Good Friday. They said, she asked them, why are we going to Mass on Good Friday? And they said, well, this is the day that Jesus died. Then she burst into tears and said, I didn't even have the chance to say goodbye. Easter Sunday, I'm in the procession getting ready to come in. And she turns to her dad and she goes, no, Jesus didn't die. There he is. But she got the basic story, even though she doesn't have it pointed at the right people. But it's just what the challenges are of larger families, but also some of the great blessings. So tonight we're going to start with Dr. Baird, who's going to speak for a few minutes to just talk about the economic implications of the birth dearth.
Well, good evening. I'm Chuck Baird. Doctors are people who have stethoscopes. I have never had a stethoscope, so I'm pleased to be called Chuck Baird, not Dr. Baird. And I want to thank Father John because it was he who said, you must read this book. And I did. And I was fascinated by it, not least because it was written by Catherine Pekalik, who has a PhD in economics from Harvard. But when I pick up a book, I've always done this throughout my life. When I pick up a book, the first thing I look at are the endorsement statements. Then I look at the index. And lo and behold, what I found was a lot of names who are friends of mine in the economics world. And I said, wow, this book is worth reading. Father John was right, and so I read it. And I don't regret it. It was quite an experience. So thank you, Father, for turning me on to the book and for inviting me to be on this panel. Father mentioned already the birth dearth. The U.S. fertility rate as of May of this year was 1.62. The fertility rate is the expected births per woman of reproductive age. 1.62, where 2.1 in richer countries is the replacement rate. In poorer countries, the replacement rate is around 2.2. Poorer countries have a harder time being replaced for perhaps obvious reasons. Catherine, I'm going to refer to the author as Catherine, Dr. Pekalik. Catherine points out that there have been several government attempts, not only in the United States, but in other countries as well, in Japan, in Norway, in Australia, all over the world, to do something about this birth dearth because it really is a demographic problem. It's a serious problem. These attempts have been universally, except for a brief time in Australia, and I don't know why that's true, but for a brief time in Australia, these measures were effective, but everywhere else, totally ineffective. Why? Well, I'm going to get to that later. So, what are the reasons for the birth dearth? Well, as Catherine points out, we're talking about the United States now. As the United States went from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy, the significance of children as workers on the farm decreased. There's better life expectancy as medical technology improved and public health measures improved. There has been a huge increase in the cost of raising children. I think we're all aware of that. The cost of raising children, like childcare, like education. I mean, they're kind of overwhelming costs. But there's also been an increase in what economists call the opportunity cost of giving birth. So I'm making a distinction between the cost of raising a child, on the one hand, and the opportunity cost of giving birth. Now, I'll get to opportunity cost later because it is key to what Catherine is doing in this book. And of course, there's the issue of contraception. Incidentally, as Catherine points out, the use of contraception amongst Catholics and Mormons is not significantly different from other groups. And it's a very high rate of use of contraception. And of course, then there's the one that bothers people the most, and it should bother people the most, and that's the ready, almost universal availability of abortion. I don't want to get into that fraught question here tonight, but that's part of the birth dearth. It's a significant part of the birth dearth, I think. So why is the birth dearth important? Well, Father mentioned Social Security, pensions, Social Security. Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system. It was introduced in 1935. It's part of the New Deal. It was sold deceptively as people putting money into a fund which had their name on it, which they would later, when they came to retirement, be able to draw down on. It was never true. Never, even at the beginning. It is a pay-as-you-go system, much like Bernie Madoff. You know, what you count on is young people who are working and paying the taxes, and out of those taxes, you pay the pensions that you owe the older people. And then and Catherine points out something I never thought of in thinking about Social Security. And I've been, in my professional life, I've been very critical of Social Security for a long time. But this is one that I never thought of. And as she calls it, correctly calls it, it is a free rider problem. It's a classic free rider problem in Social Security. And what is that? The way Social Security is set up contributes to the birth dearth. Social Security itself contributes to the birth dearth. How? Well, the benefits that you get as a retiree under Social Security are independent of the number of children you have or have had. So look at this from the point of view of a person. I don't have to have any children. I'll rely on other people to have the children. Those children will pay money that I take out of it. I get to take out of that fund without having any children or having very few children. That's a natural counter-incentive to birth, set up by the federal government. I don't think they did that on purpose. I don't think they were smart enough to do it on purpose. But that was interesting. But more important than that, I think, why is the birth dearth important? This goes to the work of an economist who was cited several times in the book by Catherine, and that's my friend, my late friend, Julian Simon. Julian Simon was a professor of economics at the University of Maryland. He wrote a very, very interesting, important book called The Ultimate Resource. The Ultimate Resource. If you go back to the 70s, remember we were going to run out of everything. All the resources are going to be gone. We're going to live in the darkness. We're going back to the caves. Well, that was all balderdash. Why? Because, as Julian Simon pointed out, the ultimate resource is human minds. You want more births because these people are going to be entrepreneurial. They're going to have insights. They're going to be able to bring about technological change and other kinds of changes that make growth possible, that make all kinds of other things possible. People are not the problem. It's the dearth of people that is the problem. We count on, where does progress come from? It doesn't come from Washington, D.C., and it doesn't come from Phoenix. It comes from entrepreneurship, creativity, innovation, change, trial and error, discovery in a environment of radical uncertainty, taking chances, finding out what works, finding out what doesn't work, trying to do the best you can for yourself according to the capability of your minds. It is human minds that are the ultimate resource. Now let's move on to this question of methodology of economics. Catherine has done a qualitative study, which is very unusual in economics. Very unusual, although it's becoming less unusual. When I tell people that by the way, I'm retired, I'm not a professor of economics, I'm not active, I'm retired. They call that emeritus. They pretend that I have some special merit, so they call me an emeritus professor, which simply means I'm retired, I'm not active anymore. So I tell people I'm an economist, or was an economist, an academic economist. You know what people say? A lot of people say right away, well, they say two things. Wow, you must know a lot of mathematics. And you must know a lot of analytical statistics. Right? Well, I do, because I went to graduate school at Berkeley, and I had to jump through those hoops, mathematics and statistics. But you know, in my professional life, when I got out of graduate school, when I was an independent person, I never used those things. My approach to economics is different, and I'll get to that later too. Now, if you took a course in economics in college, what do you remember? What do you remember? I bet you, if you took a course, you would remember there's a lot of math, there's a lot of statistics, and there are a lot of curves on the blackboard. This line intersects that line, this line is tangent to that line. That's not economics. Those are the tools of economics, the tools of a particular approach to economics, the tools of the quantitative approach to economics. I used to tell my friends who were very much into quantitative economics that they had physics envy. Physics envy. Because after all, the physicists are real scientists. And they can get National Science Foundation grants. And so what we have to do is hype up everything we can in mathematics, statistics, and make it look like science, so we too can get National Science Foundation grants. And it became, that kind of quantitative analysis became the definition of doing good economics. One of my heroes in economics is Milton Friedman. Some of you may remember that name. Milton and his wife, Rose, were friends of mine. We were colleagues. They are both deceased now. We were colleagues in the Mont Pelerin Society, and we did other things together. Milton wrote a famous article called The Methodology of Positive Economics. And if you took an economics class, you were probably assigned to read that piece. Well, Milton came out very strongly in favor of restricting economics to the quantitative approach. I disagreed with him on that, but those are the days when you could disagree with somebody and still be friends. So we had kind of a a friendly banter about that point. So quantitative economics has to ignore a lot of what is really important in economics. What is the economic way of thinking? How do peaceful people, in other words, non-predatory people, do the best they can, or try to do the best they can for themselves in all the situations they confront, recognizing that they cannot do all that they would like to do? What is the key point of economic study, the economic way of thinking? It is simply this: make your decision on the basis of benefits versus costs. Nothing is perfect, and nothing is absolutely horrible. It's all a question of trade-offs. So, comparing costs and benefits. Costs and benefits are both subjective. They're not objective. Right? The benefit that you get from listening to, I don't know, Leonard Bernstein's Candide is measured how? Is there a meter that tells you how happy you are? Or how significant that thing is to you? That particular piece of music is to you? Is there any way to quantify that? Or is it just the way you think about it? Isn't it simply the significance that your mind attaches to it, which is unique to you, and is subjective, and cannot be measured by any measuring stick? There is no significance meter that'll plug into your brain and give out S units to tell you how significant something is to you. There's no such thing. It is not quantifiable. Now, that means that contrary to my late friend Milton, that leads to an alternative to quantitative economic thinking. And there are at least two different alternatives, but they're both based on the fact of subjective costs and benefits. One is, and this is the kind that was done by people like Jim Buchanan, who was one of the prime founders of public choice theory, referenced by Catherine in the book, by Friedrich Hayek, F.A. Hayek, who's also referenced in the book. This is economic analysis using logic, starting out from certain axioms and making predictions about patterns, excuse me, such as when one thing increases, something else has to decrease. I can't really quantify it, but the logic tells me that that's the pattern that's going to emerge. That is the essence of human action. And then there's the kind that Catherine does, and that is the kind that is based on, my fingers are arthritic. I can't get my pages to turn. That's the kind that's based on surveys, which is the essence of this book, where she went out, she had a sample of 55 women who had 5 or more children, and interviewed them about how they thought, what their attitudes were, what were the difficulties they encountered, and so on. That is a qualitative analysis. It's not measuring anything. It's just people speaking with each other and ideas formed from that interaction, from that verbal interaction. And she's very good at it. You read the book, she knows how to do, she knows how to do those surveys. She really does. Now, here's the essence of the problem according to Catherine. Why is there a birth dearth? Well, for the reasons that I already suggested, and she covers them and say, yeah, that's important, but it's not really important compared to the essence. The essence is this. There are women face, and men too, but really it's women, face huge opportunity costs of giving birth. Now, what is opportunity cost? When you make a decision to do A, because you're doing A, there's something else you can't do. There's some opportunity that you have to give up. Now, it's not everything else that you could do. That's not the cost. What is the cost? The cost of taking a particular action A is the subjective value or the significance you attach to your next best alternative. That's what you have to give up. You can't do it all. You're making trade-offs between particular things. So it's a subjective value, meaning the significance that the mind attaches to something that you're giving up when you decide to take a particular action, like giving birth. But what does a woman have to give up? And what is the significance of that? You give up career, because now, right, especially, all the careers are open to women, and rightly so. They should be open to women, in my opinion. But you have to give up career opportunities. You have to give up status in other people's eyes, maybe. You have to give up lifestyle. Catherine talks about giving up yourself in order that you can have a better self as you see it because of your children. Those are huge things. Those are huge barriers, or not barriers, impediments to giving birth, because you have to give up so much as a woman. You have to give up a lot. Now, on the benefit side, right, you make decisions based on costs and benefits. The cost is subjective value attached to all those things that you are giving up when you decide to be a mom instead of be a tenure-track economics professor or a doctor or a lawyer or a CPA or whatever else it is. But on the benefit side, what is it? It's the subjective significance that the brain attaches to an additional child. The subjective significance that the brain attaches to an additional child. What would that possibly be? Well, let's see what the women who were surveyed in that book say. Children are the source of joy. There was a woman who said, I guess she was talking with somebody, she obviously had a large number of kids, and some observer said, well, do you have any time? Where do you find joy? And she said, the children are the joy. They are. You have to think that way. Children can be, as she says, as her respondent said, children are the connection to infinity. Wow. What a thought that is. A connection to infinity. It's your chain. It's your link into the future and backwards by large families that came before you. This is the key to solving the birth dearth. She says, women have to, how am I going to say this? Women have to learn or somehow come to the perception that children are the source of joy. That won't be true of all women. But we wish it were true of more women, let's put it that way. All of the 55 people in her sample were religious, with one exception. Lauren was the woman's name. She wasn't particularly religious, but she and her husband just loved having children. To them, children were the source of joy, notwithstanding that they weren't religious. But that was the setup. So let me come to a conclusion here. She has, I mentioned the Social Security free rider problem, but that she had another observation right in the last chapter. It says, what can we do about this? The future of the nation is the title of the last chapter. So what can we do about this? Well, she said, for one thing, government has crowded out education, particularly religious education, has just pushed people out of religious education because of the comparative cost compared to the so-called free cost of public school. And she says, well, government should stop doing that, should stop trying to monopolize the education market, speaking like an economist now. Stop trying to monopolize the education market. And I certainly agree with her on that, and I might say, although she doesn't say, but I say that school choice measures are a great step in that direction that she is advocating in the book. And finally, she said, the last statement she says in the last chapter, her last words, when she's talking about the government not being able to crowd out a religious education, she has this wonderful expression. She says, set the temple free. Right? That's what we have to do. And then finally, on page 235, which is right at the end of the book, she tells me and she tells you what her research agenda is, how she sees this book and how she sees her future work. And I'll just read the quote. Describing how they, meaning her respondents, were different in kind is the task of this book. Understanding where that kernel of different comes from will be the task of future work. She's pursuing this. She's not going to let this sit. She's really into this. And I look forward to the next book. Thank you. Oh, and I'm looking forward to questions when we're all done.
Would you feel more comfortable up there or here? I'm going to sit over there. That's exactly it. And so Ben and Kristen, they have the 5 children that are taking up space. When he was talking about children as the connection with infinity, I thought Lucy, Rachel, and Ryan is the Stamer connection with infinity. Because one of the things she says in the book is that you start seeing children as an end in themselves, as opposed to, say, in an agricultural environment where there could be help on the farm, like my mom's story, or because of our position on child labor where you can't put kids to work when they're 6 years old, then they become, burdens in the family in an economic sense. And so it really is, the other thing is how many children you can afford, as opposed to just seeing the beauty of children as an end in itself. So the Tonners have made a decision. They're at least at 5 at this point. I'm not going to push any further. But if you'll maybe step up to the podium where everybody could see you, then I asked them to talk about this other aspect of the book that Chuck did not talk about. And that's what the qualitative effect is on children as they grow up with brothers and sisters. And the more brothers and sisters they have, and the more complicated it has, the effect it has on the maturity, problem-solving skills, and ultimately their happiness in life.
Thank you, Father John. And Chuck, that was wonderful. I love the tie to the economics side, and that's not the outcome we set out to accomplish, but there's certainly a ripple effect through the economy and society because of it. So, on the back of this book, if you haven't read it, this is my copy and I'm done with it. So somebody can take it home tonight. But I'm going to just read this one quick quote. So Catherine Pakulik makes the compelling case for having a large family in a modern context of adult autonomy and hyper-individualism. If we think about those two phrases, adult autonomy, hyper-individualism, we think about opportunity cost, I would insert my opinion here that many of those opportunity costs are simply perceived. Chuck, I think, said it's subjective. But where we are, in many cases, I think, assigning a value far beyond maybe its objective value. So, as a backdrop here. So, Father John asked us to answer a couple of questions just about our personal experience. And I'm going to go first because I have the dull portion, and then Kristen can add some heartfelt context there. So, what are the advantages of raising a family of 5 children and then some of the challenges? So, I would offer this as we didn't set out to have a large family. It found us through faith and prayer and being open to something that's larger than ourselves. And so if there's an opportunity cost there, it's more about what is serving someone else. What value does that have? So there's always laughter and there's always joy. There's a built-in friend and somebody to listen. So our 5 kids there are playing unattended. There is no adult supervision, and so far we've been all right.
Knock on all the wood, don't say it.
So there's a built-in community. There's community right at home. You don't have to seek that out. It's there every day. The cost of each subsequent child, the material cost, is significantly less. There's, I think, a misperception that there will be a tremendous cost at each birth. And I can tell you from our experience, aside from any medical emergencies, that's simply false. In fact, it is more and more financially possible with each child, hand-me-downs, etc. It doesn't impact you negatively. Having 5 children stretches me as an adult and forces me to put the needs of others at hand, or the kids and my wife, constantly. So we think about the hyper-individualism. That gets nipped in the bud just naturally with the larger family. It is difficult, however, for me to meet the needs of 5 children regularly, especially at the ages that they're at. They're between 12 and 1. And so while that's tough for me, it also teaches the children the need for patience and what I would call a realistic outlook on life. I can't get what I want when I want it because I want it. Is that realistic? I would argue it's not. They're learning that naturally as well. And then the exhaustion level is real. That is a cost. But when you're putting it forth for someone else, there's tremendous value there. So I don't know if you want to go.
I think the advantages for me for a family of 5 and maybe more, I think the older our last one gets, the more we're like, could we do one more? Probably we could do one more. So we'll have to see. And I think, like Ben said, just the community, this is their first real experience of community. And then as we're older, we've been absorbed into the St. Mark community, and we're plugged into school community and a soccer community, and our community as a family is large, but their first experience of community is happening now. And because of that, the joy that they experience is magnified. So for Lucy and Dominic, they're our number 4 and our number 5. When they rolled over the first time or they walked the first time, there was a really large gap between when they did it the first time and when they did it any other time, because there was so much shrieking with excitement that they were like, oh, I don't think I want to do that again. So the joy for them is magnified. And I think the sorrows are lessened because there's 7 of us that can pull together. And if someone is mean to you at school or has called you a name, in my case, my dad isn't well and I'm working through a lot of grief, but there's 7 people who are helping to carry the cross. And that's a really beautiful community that we're really grateful to be a part of. And Ben, I think, outlined the challenges really well. And I would say we have 4 girls and then a boy. And that boy has been a steep learning curve for myself. I only have a younger sister. Boys are very different. I have learned it the hard way. And so I think, too, some of the challenges is just getting everybody where they need to go at the right time. And then I'm running behind Dominic trying to keep him alive, and Lucy's running behind me talking to me. And there's a lot of a give and take to try to meet everybody where they're at.
So the next that Father asks us to comment on is, how do multiple siblings affect the spiritual and personal development of the children? And so I on my notes here just said it's beautiful to watch them grow as a group, individually, but then also as a collective group. Our older ones, Maria and Anne, really help our younger children to grow and develop. It happens naturally. They don't even realize it. They're teaching. I put in here quasi-catechists. They're fielding questions about our faith from their younger siblings and checking it with us and through Father John and our community here. The children are seldom alone or bored because there's always somebody around. So they have kind of their favorites that they play with. But if that person's sick or away, there's someone else. Everybody pitches in to keep the house running. And that sounds maybe like we're just surviving, and sometimes that's true. But without even realizing it, it's a sense of community, a group of people working together to accomplish a task, right? To clean the house or to get ready for dinner or something like that. And then I would just comment, attending Mass is crucial to our closeness as a family. We fill pretty much the whole pew when our kids aren't altar serving. But it's normal for us, and it's regular. And we have kind of our roles there, right? We're entertaining the little ones who are trying to run out, but being reverent. We're practicing genuflecting. We're always going through the communion line together to get our coveted blessing from Father John for those who haven't received their first communion. But moving forward as a collective unit, I think they grow together, and they help Kristen and I grow too.
Yes. Yeah. I think too, it has become on its own a school of virtue. So it's not that we don't take seriously teaching patience and all those things, but there are so many of them that they really dull the edges of each other, the sharpness of I want it this way, and they teach each other, even things that are not necessarily virtuous, but time management. If we all need to get out the door at 7:15, you can't come down at 7:10 and want a 6-course breakfast. It just can't be done. And so some of those things, they're just learning by nature of how many of them there are, and they work together to grow in that way.
So this next one was a good one because I think Father knew where this was going. What is your experience socializing with smaller families as well as larger families? And so there's always a bit of a shock factor when you meet somebody at school and how many kids do you have? And we say 5. Wow, 5, and then you get you must be really tired, and wow, that's something, and there's a definite reaction about the perceived loss of control. Wow, how can you control that? How does your family operate? I couldn't do that. How will you pay for college? And this illusion of control, I would say, is, wow, that seems really risky. Sounds like you couldn't control that situation. And I would just challenge that if we're trying to control all the outcomes of our life, I think we're kind of pointed in the wrong direction there. So it's a bit of an evangelization, I guess, or maybe for some they see it and they think, yeah, no, not for me, But larger families, though, there's always an immediate connection. And it's almost like a sense of relief of, oh, good, it's another big family, they get it. It's going to be a little bit messy. Yeah, it is. And it's nice, and to the point of this book, it's now less than 5% of families would be 5 or more. One distinction I do want to draw in this book is this is all women who had professional careers and gave it up in lieu of, either put it on pause or stopped it altogether to have these children. I think that's an important distinction too, of the opportunity cost here, the ultimate value of things. I like, Father, you say this a lot, seeing things for what they really are. How does God intend things to be seen and used? And so I think that's a main driver throughout the book, and the women who provided the interviews here would say the value of the child far outweighs whatever I could have accomplished in a professional setting.
I would agree. And I think with larger families too, there's a quiet understanding that there's like crying because I'm mad, there's crying because I'm annoyed that I'm not getting what I want, and then there's actual really hurt crying. And so there's just an understanding that if we're all together and there's 10 and 12 children running around, until you hear the really I'm hurt crying, it's probably okay. And there's a sense of relief there that we're all, I think, control for all of us is an illusion, and God uses very many various events in all of our lives, regardless of children and status and all those things, to try to get us to loosen the reins a little bit. And for us, I think that came in a large part by having 5 children and realizing that I cannot control it all, and other families are learning that through their experience as well. And so there's some relief and solidarity that we're kind of doing it together, and we're learning how to let go together. And there's a lot of grace that's offered to one another, especially when you can't give it to yourself.
See, all of her answers are far deeper than any of mine, so her responses. So in kind of the final piece here, so how did Dr. Pakulik's stories of family development resonate with both of you? I think, and Father John said it was kind of like reading a story about our family. I was like, wow, there's a lot of commonalities here amongst both the challenges but then the joys. One of the phrases here, giving yourself away, means getting back even more. So she talks about that, but that's really much of Christ's message, is to die to self, to treat your neighbor as yourself. Give of yourself and you shall receive it back. And that's a bit of bravery, and again, we didn't set out to accomplish this. This happened slowly over time. But I can absolutely attest to the fact that just letting go and giving yourself away, you will receive it back for sure. I wrote this, I led with it. The opportunity cost of having children is far less than society perceives. I just believe that. That's just my opinion. It's alluded to in the book. I think if we set that with the backdrop of seeing things in the way that God intended them to be seen, I think that shines out. What are we giving up for children? We're saying no to children to say yes to what? And what would the ultimate value of that be versus that of a child? And it's different for every person and every situation. And then the final thing is, and this gets to some of the things that Chuck talked about, life is about more than me and my worldly desires. So I could be driving a nicer car, could be taking more vacations, could be doing a lot of things that are very fun. But I'm glad that I'm not, because I really believe that we're doing something far more valuable with our time and the gifts that God's given us.
I think too, the part of the book that resonated with me was that I really believe that having these children has really formed me into who God was creating me to be all along. I'm one of 2 growing up in my family. I have a younger sister. We come from very exceptionally stubborn parents, but if you ask them, they are not stubborn at all. And I am the oldest, and I am a type A, and I know what's good for me, and I also know what's good for all of you. And if you would just listen to me, I could tell you what you should do. And being a parent to these wonderful children has softened my edges and has allowed me to, I think, see the humanity in a lot of other people, where in my younger days I would have been very quick to tell you what you're doing is wrong, or what you should be doing my idea is better. I've learned a lot about listening and slowing down and just trying to connect with people as humans, that we don't need somebody else telling us what to do. In a lot of situations, we need to be seen. And I think having our children has allowed me to slow down some, even though that's counterintuitive because we're busy all the time, but has allowed me to slow down and see God's face in each person. And it's no longer that I am right and I have the right idea. And I still struggle with that every single day. But that part of the book really resonated with me. This hasn't taken away from my life or taken away from my career in any way. It has made me a much, much better person in every way.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the idea of the panel was try to cover both perspectives on the book, the economics part, which is very interesting, but also the human part, which I thought was very touching. And the book is just full of great stories about kids connecting and how much human beings have to offer each other. I like to offer constructive criticisms because the book is really about Hannah's children. And the story of Hannah is in 1 Samuel. And if you remember, Hannah is a beautiful woman. Her husband has 2 wives. One has all the children and she has none. But her husband keeps saying, "Aren't I enough for you?" And the answer, I think, of most women is, no, you are not. And so she asked God to please give her a baby. The priest, because I always like this part, accuses her of being drunk because she's crying so much. But what she basically promises is, if you give me a baby, I'll give him back to you. And that's where Samuel the prophet comes from. But it's a great image in this book about what families are about, and that children are ends in themselves. I had a little guy who comes to confession all the time. He's very devout. I said, "You ever think about being a priest? Because I'm always planting the seeds." No, my family's depending on me to carry the line forward. You know? And I think the one thing that I would criticize the book, and it's a constructive criticism, but it's maybe beyond the scope, is there's really no men's voices in the book at all. If a man says anything, they're like sitting in the background and throwing a comment in, which is so unlike husbands. And so, because if you go through all of how we look at things, we never look at relationships holistically. Because there's always this temptation, even with people who are critical of it, to always look at people as individuals as opposed to rational, dependent animals. Now, that it's relationship that makes us, and that men have immense things to gain in a committed relationship with women, starting with they have to move on beyond being 16 years old, and then move into this larger world, which is so much a gift of being a man. It's the gift of being a celibate priest. You have to learn how to care about others, get up in the middle of the night like a mom would get up or a dad would get up, because this gift of love. As I always point out, the gospel tells us the truth. Salvation comes because you learn to love God with your whole heart, your soul, and your being, and love your neighbor as yourself. It never says salvation comes from learning how to be loved better, or what's in it for me, or how I feel about it. Because they're those simply things that are not in control. It's in giving you to receive, right? And so at the end of this, I was thinking maybe there would be questions or observations from people who have also raised families. I have a microphone. I'm willing to give it up. Is there anything you'd like to say or a question you'd like to ask?
Hi, I'm Joanne Baird, and I'm Chuck's wife, and I'm also a practicing marriage and family therapist. And I just want to affirm what Father said about systems. Marriage and family therapists are trained to think systemically. And this is a family system. It's the system. It's the community. You heard that word community. Then you heard the community with the church and Father and all of us that are part of the bigger family. And then the biggest family, the whole systemic thing of what's going on in our culture and what we're up against. But that's the way my brain thinks in terms of the importance of community. It's essential. I am the church. You are the church. We are the church together. And they are the church, and they are a blessing, a beautiful witness. Thank you.
I once watched Bishop Kikanis chase this priest all over the room trying to get the microphone back. And the guy, every time he'd lure him in, then he'd quickly turn like this and go the other way. Does anybody else have some comments?
Oh, I create a microphone.
No, the people out in the TV land need to hear it.
Okay, hi. I wonder, and I consider that whole opportunity cost thought. Because why don't we see it as the job, the vocation that it is? Why do we think about, oh, I'm giving something up in order to do this? I think there are people who know that this is what they're drawn to do and feel like this is just as much a vocation as the priesthood or marriage or anything. And so I'd like to think less of it as an opportunity cost and more of something you're drawn to and would rather be no other place than at home with your children.
Thank you. Well, the biggest thing is just think about culture. What's important, and it's part of the problem having a culture that's paycheck driven, where work outside the house has a dollar and cent value. Work inside the house does not have a dollar and cent value, and you can't underestimate that. One of the things that she had said in her book was she looked at faculties at Harvard and who had children, and overwhelmingly men were fathers, small families, but men were fathers. And very few women were, and in fact, there were few older women that were on the faculty that had any children at all. Because the choice to be made is whether you have a family or whether you're going to succeed in the academic world. That Dr. Pakalak had 8 kids. Well, her husband's a very devout Catholic man, and there's an interesting story all of there. But it's why it's a husband and wife as this part of this root of this community. That's really the sense of what is the answer to this question. That it's not just a woman's work to raise children. But Dr. Pakalak's book really focuses on that. Did anyone else have anything to say?
I'd like to reply to that lady, if I could. People who have made this kind of choice, like our friends here, and for whom having children is an end in and of itself, they don't ignore opportunity cost. They're doing what economists say they do. They simply, on the one hand, look at having a children, and that is a pearl of great price for them. It is so significant, it is so beneficial, that it overcomes whatever else they have to give up to do it. So I got a sense, it's probably unjustly, but I got a sense that you were saying people should ignore opportunity cost. You know, you shouldn't ignore opportunity cost, but if there's a value on the other side that overtakes the opportunity cost, then you're like big family people, like our friends here.
I'll add one of my favorite quotes from this. I think gets at what you're saying is, how are we missing the value of motherhood? I think maybe is what you're saying. And so Dr. Pakalak in here interviews other women who say, I wish I would have had more children. Not one more or two, but just more. There is that desire. I think that's what you're talking about. That there is an understanding of the value, to Father's point. One of these things you get a paycheck for every other week, and the other one you don't. One's very controllable, the other one isn't. But I thought that was really interesting. I wish I would have had more. So I think what you're describing is alive, but maybe suppressed.
Kristen, did you have anything?
I don't.
Do you actually agree with your husband? Let's hold that for later. And so just out of the book, one woman who was a mother of many children was in her medical residency when she bailed out and started to have a family. The secular, I think he was a secular Jew, or she's married to a secular Jew. She had her PhD, and I think in economics, because she was talking with Dr. Pakalik about it. And so all of these women had at one level or another had just bailed out on what their career was. The New York Times had an article some time ago about the number of women who were partners in law firms, that kind of thing, who just bailed out on the career in favor of having families. And so I always thought one of the failures of feminism, feminist critique, was it always wanted to have a life that had the same opportunities that men had. It just never did much of a study as to whether men were happy with all those opportunities, because there is something much more fundamental at play in being a human being. Probably a good time to pull it to a close, maybe with a prayer for families and vocations, young people thinking about being married and wondering about these questions of themselves, that God will be there to guide them. So why don't we start in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And let's pray to our mother. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. And let's thank our panelists for taking the time, because that was a wonderful. And now, if I could, please, if somebody can take the tablecloths off and fold them up, if someone else can take the table and put it back where I stole it from, and maybe the 3 chairs could go back out to the choir loft. Many hands make light work.